Here, I'm really happy to have Roger Ort. Roger is a colleague in Schuyler County Cooperative Extension. He deals with horticulture related questions and topics. Roger's experience growing a wide variety of these plants is going to be evident very quickly. He owns and operates the Ort Family Farm, and they have a little nursery, actually not so little, a nursery, as well as a lot of the specialty products that we've been talking about. He has experience in making them and selling them. His farm is in the Finger Lakes, and if you're real, I'm a follower of his on Facebook, and I enjoy it very much, especially in the season. He's posting lots of cool things. So I encourage you to kind of follow these guys on social media. And without further ado, I think we're going to go ahead and let Roger start talking. We have 4 different plants that he's going to talk about, so it's going to be a very full session. We'll try to pause at the end of each and have a little Q&A then, but just do ask your questions in the chat box. So Roger, take it away.
Well, thank you, Laura, for having me, and it's a real honor to teach here with Steve and Eric and Laura, and this just should be fun. I told Laura and Natasha I put on the special Pawpaw shirt for you guys today, so we're gonna like really dig in. Let me start screen sharing, and then I'll talk more, but I just want to make sure that comes up. And
it looks good. You're there.
Let's see here. Let's get to the first.
Go to slideshow up at the top.
Yeah, I can't get to it. There it is.
Oh, yeah, Zoom must have been hiding it.
That's all right.
Beautiful.
Everybody got it now?
Yeah, looks great.
All right.
Before you get started, Roger, I do want to tell people that if the transcript or the closed caption on the bottom bothers you, that's there for people to turn off or on as they need it. And so if it's, for those of you who didn't realize, you can actually turn it off. If you go to live transcript and hit hide subtitle, you can actually turn that off if you don't need it.
Great.
I'll be quiet now. Thanks.
Oh, that's all right, Laura. Glad I got the screen up. So give you a little background about a little bit about where I come from. I'm not an academic, so it'll be a little different than Steve's. I come from we planted most of this fruit on the farm for our jam production. So let's go back a little bit. So started my nursery journey probably in '78, roughly. Started working at a nursery in Pennsylvania. That's where I grew up, and fell in love with the plant business. So here we are, what, 41, 42 years later, still in the plant business. And we moved our family in '99 up to New York, bought a bigger farm. We traded in the 3 acres in Pennsylvania for around the 60-acre farm in New York area. And dabbled in livestock for many years when the kids were in 4-H, and I still have my love of plants. And so we started a commercial kitchen on the farm with some of the fruit that we were growing, and that just took off. And people really love the flavor of our jams. And my wife is real creative with doing the blends. I think in a really good year, she'll hit 100+ flavors of jam from this unusual fruit, which is how this got started. And then we put out rows of like 5 to test everything. And then if it passed that test, then it went to rows of 300 foot. And then of course came into the kitchen as we pick it. And then we had plants, doing divisions like Steve showed you with the Aronia yesterday, dividing and starting plants for the nursery and connecting with my friends. You make a lot of, in this business, it's really nice that the folks you meet, like Eric and Steve. I met Steve many moons ago, and Sean Dombrowski and Akiva, and there's so many folks in this area that are really what I call plant nuts like myself, and that gets you hooked on this stuff. And then you start growing it, and then you find the pests, and you find the deer, and you find things that make it more of a challenge. So what I'm going to share with you today, hopefully, is what I've learned, and some of these slides have even taught me some new things. So that's really interesting. And that's why we're all here, is to learn. So of course, my business at home is Ort Family Farm. You guys can follow us on Facebook or write us for a plant list. We sell, I think everything we're talking about, I sell plants for. So that is something on the side. My horticulture hat at Cooperative Extension has really changed. Horticulture now encompasses, of course, anything agriculture, but local foods. And I also teach the master gardening program within a multi-county area. So that's ever evolving there with the Cooperative Extension. So let's dive in. So you'll be learning today about sea buckthorn, pawpaw, persimmon, and figs. And we'll try to give you some tidbits of each one and some of the growing conditions and stuff. And any more, if I don't have something on here, feel free. I belong to a lot of clubs and a lot of North American fruit explorers and those kind of groups that you can dive in and find information anymore, which is what's so nice about Google. And you can find anything on pH or pollination and so on. So if I don't have it in here, I apologize, but tried to throw you a lot of information so that you have these slides for the future. So here is some sea buckthorn that I have on the farm, some different varieties. I wanted to show you the color differences in the many varieties here. We started out, I believe, again, with the row of 5, really fell in love with these. Now there's a row, about a 300-foot row out there that hopefully we'll get a little better at our picking and start our jam production on these. We really only sold them last year for eating and took them to our farm stand. But that was the most of that. So here's a little bit, let's go to the history. So seaberry are shrubs native to Eurasia. The Siberian pineapple is the name in Russia, which I get more of an orange juicy kind of flavor when I eat them. Typical height 8 to 30, depending on soil and cultivar. Most of mine have reached that 8-foot, but I don't have anything in that 30-foot range at all. I love the ability to fix nitrogen through the bacteria that live on the roots. It is wind pollinated, which is really cool. So I keep all mine in the row. And you'll see down here the next one about the inconspicuous flowers, and the male and female flowers are found on separate plants. When they are side by side, it is really easy to tell the males from the females. The males will have triple, maybe 4 times the amount of flower sacs on there, and really easy to tell them apart. So when people ask, well, how do I know if I have a male or female plant? It is pretty easy to tell. The survivability down to -40, and I believe the top temperature goes into the 100+ range. So they are just really tough as nails. I think they call them a pioneer species. They're one of the first ones that can come back in their native areas after the soil has been disturbed or fire or something. These are pioneer species. Tolerant of both high pH and clay soils, which I love. Here on the farm, Natasha and I were talking that I deal a lot with clay and have to do a lot of amending and trying to beef up my organic matter. And the pH range goes as high as 8.5. So really diverse. The scientific name means shining horse because the plant was said to give horses a healthy coat of hair. I always like these little backstories. Throughout the Eurasian steppe, the plants were used by indigenous people for food, forage, and medicine. It makes sense on a lot of these varieties had multiple uses in the past, and hopefully we bring that back. 1930s, introduced to Canada for shelter belt and reclamation projects. Commercialization began in the 1940s in the Soviet Union. The Soviet scientists began developing new products to take advantage of the health benefits of seaberry oil. So that is really where it kicked off. And at the end of the 20th century, most of the production and processing of seaberry switched to Mongolia and China. China currently has between 150 to 200 factories that process seaberries. So that just shows you the amount of how this has grown. Sea berries rarely eaten fresh. I do eat some fresh. Like I said, that orange juicy, but it is has a little kick to it. So made into juice, jams, and jellies are really some of the main things that you can market. Fruit is remarkably rich in a variety of medicinal compounds and nutrients, vitamin C, vitamin E, and a high concentration of both protein and unsaturated oils. So then that leads into the 5 basic components. You can either do juice, pulp oil, powder nutrient supplement, seed oil, and animal feed. So I don't think we've really tapped into a lot of that yet. So sea berries have been used in Chinese and Tibetan medicine for 1,000 years. Oil extracted from the sea berries has been used to prevent things like sunburn, cure sunburn, burn skin, skin damage, malnutrition. In addition, sea berry oil can be reduce inflammation, reduce the bacterial counts, and promote regeneration of tissue. So it has, as you can see, that the health benefits really a lot of things that we haven't tapped into. I just found this online, but just here's some things. And like Steve said, we really can't be promoting a lot of the health benefits and so on, but these are things that they do suggest that it can help with dry eye, cardioprotective effects, boost the immune system, fight depression, excellent source of omega-7, improve digestion, moisturize the skin and scalp, healthy hormones, reduce inflammation, liver and pancreas support. So you can see quite a diverse group there, and that's just some. If you Google that, there is way more than those 10 things that they suggest. So propagation and planting. Before I delve into this, I think it's Perfect Circle Farm in Vermont. I don't have it on here, but Buzz Ferber is the gentleman's name. He has a whole thing of propagation of sea berry. So Buzz has put a nice little article together on his website, Perfect Circle Farm. With growing sea berries, you should only buy named female plants. Of course, you have to have a male, so that should have said a male plant there also. One male plant can pollinate 6 to 8 female plants. Male seedlings, of course, are your pollinators. Sea berry plants are difficult to find, but easy to propagate. And I'll sort of hedge that a little bit. Like, I have not had real good luck on propagation of them. But with trying to follow what some of Buzz is talking about, at getting the right thickness and time of year for harvesting them should increase. But I get mine right now from North Woods, which is a part of One Green World, which is their wholesale division. So if you're thinking about planting a bunch out, I think Buzz at Perfect Circle Farm sells some also. So rather than mess with cuttings right now, I just get mine in. And then the way you can get the name varieties also, which are some of them are patented on there. Down here, sea berries are native to cold deserts. And like most plants of the desert, they grow best in full sun. And I'll agree with this, like in the shade, they will stop producing and go downhill really, really fast. They are not shade tolerant at all for me. And like I said, everything here, I'm going to just tell you yes or no of what I found. I put this last one in there because we had the same thing with kiwis. There have been some reports of becoming invasive in the Midwest. In humid climates, it seems less likely. And to be truthful, on my farm, I have not found, I know there's been some chat online about the amount of runners that they can put out babies at offshoot. And if you let a planting go sort of unkept, that it can come out, 10, 15, 20 feet away from the mom plant. I guess because I am keeping aisleways and I am probably dividing some of the early runners for new plants to make my rows longer. I have not had any issues here. And like, again, just from my perspective on here, and I appreciate if anybody says that it is something that they are concerned about. I have not had any trouble with these at all, and really think the amount of good things from them really keeps them on my list of plants to keep on the farm. I do not, I want to throw this in here for you folks on there. So this is a great trimming, how to harvest. I don't officially have enough time to do a nice system like this. I wish I did, the vertical split. But you can see there in number 1, and just trying to describe this to you there, you can probably count the first V as the first trim, the second sets of V's is the second trim, and then there is the third trim. They took the 2 on the left off. They left the 2 on the right of the new growth. In the next season, after that, you can see those ones that were left actually got some berry production and put on new growth on the first set that was trimmed, and there's new growth on top of where the berries were. And then by the third season, now you have full production on the right side and you've got some production on the left side. And then you can just follow that through there in the sequence of pruning. What we'll talk about a little bit later here for harvesting there in picture 4, they're cutting off the whole limb with the berries on, throwing that in the freezer, knocking those off because picking these is a real challenge, and we'll get into the picking part here. The biggest barrier is harvesting. The plants have massive spines, and they are really, because of being that buckthorny, they have the ability to give you like a little toxin that sort of swells if you get a good jab. So freezing them and knocking them off is really important. And I think the way that they're going to be commercialized for us. So number 2 there was the cutoff and the freeze. What's nice, no disease is found on sea berries, and the fruit does not attract spotted wing Drosophila. And that's a big yes, because it, for me yesterday when Steve was talking, boy, they affect my elderberries so bad. I've not had them in my currants and so on, which is really nice, but boy, they love my elderberries. So finding a plant that they don't bother is a really nice win. The market for sea berries among Russian immigrants and most Russian Ukrainian families are willing to pick. If you were feeling about you want to do a U-pick operation, these are something that would be a great U-pick operation. And of course, processed sea berry products are usually sold through health food stores. And I think there was a place in Ithaca that used to have the concentrate. I'm not sure if they still do or not, but health food stores for sure. A couple of varieties. There is breeding programs. So you got your German ones, your Variation ones, the Siberian ones, and then there's a hybrid, which is a German-Siberian cross. And finding these in One Green World, Rain Tree, Honeyberry USA, Perfect Circle Farm, and believe me, none of them are cheap. Even at wholesale, you're still paying a premium for these plants. I think because of the newness and the propagation issues, they're not as easy as that one slide said. So yes, you pay usually a 1 to 2 gallon pot, $25 and up usually. So retail. So if you're trying to get them wholesale, go with the Northwoods or maybe Perfect Circle Farm. There, and let me just go back. So, okay, let's stop there and take questions, Laura.
All right, that sounds great. There was mostly conversation. There was a little bit of conversation about the possibility for these being moved by birds. And I just mentioned that I had heard from some invasive plant species folks that they did think it was moved by birds, but I have not seen that.
Same here. I've never seen bird drops ever. Only the issues I've seen online are from the runners sprouting up. And then when it was left go for 2 years, they came back and then there was like plants everywhere. But like I said, if it is actually kept, and I believe on there, I've not seen, so yes and no, bird droppings, no for sure, but I've seen, but runners, yes, I've seen here, but not out of control.
Okay. And it does seem like that might be a little bit location specific because there's several people that have said that they're getting pretty aggressive growth. And some of these plants, you know, they will take 10, 15 years before they really get established. And then all of a sudden, bam, they can really take
Right.
off. So maybe
Right.
that's what we're seeing.
Yep. Yep.
Steve is mentioning that he had a problem with canker that can girdle big branches and kill the whole branch. I don't know if you've noticed that,
Never
Roger.
have had that here. So there again, maybe site specific or area, because we have a wide range of folks online here. But here in New York, I have not. For me, maybe keep my fingers crossed too. So.
Yeah. And then there's a little bit of discussion about bird control and netting not being quite what they had hoped. I will say, just before we get into a bigger discussion on bird control, bird netting is really best used if you have a structure to support it off the plants, especially on a plant like this with the thorns. It can be such a headache to have it just draped on the plant. So do think about utilizing bird netting with a structure.
Right. Right. And I think, like the gentleman said there yesterday there too, I give up a percentage to birds, which I haven't seen a lot in there, maybe because I have so much fruit, they bother other things like the mulberries and so on, that I have not had. So I give up probably a little percentage, but to use other deterrents like CDs hanging out there and the bird tape and different things that I experiment with. So.
Right.
I would just, this is Eric, I would just add in 2 cents here. So I worked with my friend Ben Falk on his seaberry farm up in Vermont, and those plants have been there, some of them over 12 years. They're loaded every year, and the birds have not been an issue there. They have been an issue with lots of other berries, so it's not like they're not there. You know, the cedar waxwings are nailing the honeyberries there now, but the sea berries in three different planting sites have basically no bird problems that I've ever seen. And by far and away, like Roger said, harvest is so much the bottleneck there that, you know, birds are kind of like an afterthought. But, you know, harvesting the fruit is the big issue.
Thanks, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to make sure that people see Tracy Testo's comment too about a legacy plan for some of these. We're not going to call them invasive yet, but I would certainly say very aggressive plants. I think that a legacy plan is really very smart and responsible. So that's just my 2 cents. Eric is wondering, are there any other types of nitrogen fixers along the same lines that aren't as thorny, might be tasty? I don't know of any, but, and Mary, the variety Mary, that might be a little bit less thorny. Any experience with that, Roger?
I've never grown Mary, and boy, I've only actually seen it mentioned once, so maybe it's really new, but yeah, not one I've dealt with at all.
Okay. Why don't we move on? We've got some more questions about some other miscellaneous things, but we can kind of circle back and talk about silverberry, buffalo berry, groundnut maybe in a little bit. I have a couple thoughts that I will type into the chat about that, but we'll keep moving forward.
Good questions, everybody. Good questions. So Pawpaw is one of my passions. Here I am. Wish I could say this year looking quite that svelte, but a little bit more older picture, but Ohio Pawpaw Festival. When you get into this kind of fruit, sometimes you find these niche things like these festivals and really find other folks who have that same passion. And Pawpaw is sort of a love-hate kind of plant for folks. And I just have fallen in love with them and really enjoy growing them here and of course teaching about them. So let's dive into Pawpaw a little bit because it is a sort of an unusual fruit for its growth. So Asimina triloba, you'll have all these names like Quaker Delight, Hillbilly Mango, Hipster Banana, I like that term, because the flavor is that banana mango-y kind of flavor. It's the only near relatives to this are the mangoes, or the mangoes and plants that grow way more south. So this is the most north for a tropical fruit like this that's native. They go as far north into lower parts of Canada, but I have not seen a lot. Definitely that Ohio, Kentucky, Appalachian river areas where it really likes. It likes the hot summers and cold winters, so that zone 5 to 8 is really home, even though there is Florida native relatives basically here. And it intercrops really well with other trees, including the walnut. So it's a delicious and nutritious native fruit, but history, cultural prejudices, and difficulties in storing and shipping have relegated to the obscure backwoods of American cuisine. And I wanted to share with you guys a little. I wrote down this quote. It was from a journal entry, September 18th, 1806, Lewis and Clark. Men are entirely out of provisions, but appear perfectly contented and tell us that they can live very well on pawpaws. So there's a little story where they saved the Lewis and Clark expedition because they were just eating pawpaws at that point. They were 150 miles away from their next destination and had run out of food. So yeah, so it definitely has a rich history to it there. There is a lot of sort of research now on things like cancer fighting properties with the bark. Kentucky State's doing a lot of this. Cornell still has one of the original 1999 plantings of trials. Of course, most of those varieties are fairly old right now. There's a lot of new ones, but there's like rich yellows and whites and creamy yellows, and there's quite a diversity in these and with size and flavor. Let's see here, culture. We just talked about hardy to zone 5. They thrive in moist, fertile, well-drained soils, pH 5 to 7. Although the pawpaw tolerates shade, it produces best in full sunlight as long as it receives enough water and protected from high winds. So here on the left is a little shade structure for the next comment. They need to be shaded for the first growing season or two in the ground if you're growing them in full sun. Then after that, it's strange. They are good to go with full sun. And there also is some rumor that if you're grafting them from a scion wood that's been a tree out in full sun its whole life, it doesn't need this protection early on. So that's an interesting, just a hearsay that I've heard from folks that are grafting more than growing seedlings. But seedlings definitely need that protection when they grow out. It's a nice small tree, 12 to 25 feet tall, be spaced about 8 to 15 feet apart in your rows, and is a great ornamental, I call it a good landscaping plant too. Has a rich yellow fall color, really hardy when we talk about insects and diseases. And it does bloom after apples, peaches, pears, so it is less likely to get that late frost damage on them. With that being said, though, last spring with that really cold snaps that we had, I did get nailed and did not have much of a crop with these. So it did get nailed that year for sure. Let me see if it says here on the next one. So yeah, this is important. So there are a number of cultivars that produce superior fruit, and that's changing every year. What I used to say were great varieties now are small compared to some of the Jerry Lehman cultivars that are released, and some of the ones coming from Indiana and so on the breeding programs. Kentucky State has some new varieties that are just absolutely huge. And my wife will tell you, when you're taking seeds out, which is a pretty large seed, you want a lot of pulp for that work, because you do have to peel them. And let me just back up a second. When we talk about some of the prejudices that have caused them not to get used as much, the skin is not edible and the seeds are not edible. And if you eat those, you really get a major digestive, internal pain. And I think that's from probably some of those cancer fighting properties that they're finding in the bark and stuff are so probably well concentrated in the skin and the seeds. And that's probably why you get some of that sickness. But the pulp, you spoon that out, it is the best custardy. Oh my gosh, it's a heavenly dessert kind of, and that's where we're finding the niche market is just eating that fresh, freezing it as a puree, which wasn't done in the old days. So we can now ship bricks of this to specialty beer makers and breweries, and to folks who make custards and pies and desserts. Another one is definitely not fruit leather. I heard somebody get really sick when they dehydrated it, and that is not a good idea. Again, it probably builds up those cancer fighting, concentrates them too much at one place. So those are those things. And with pollination, which we'll talk a little bit about here too, it is a fetid flower. It is not a sweet flower. So bees and bumblebees and honeybees do not come to it. It is fly pollinated. So it is definitely, in the old days, it was like throw a dead carcass out there, bring in the flies. And nowadays it's much nicer about, maybe you can put it some buckets of manure, or you can hand pollinate, which some folks will take the time to do. Hang a piece of meat out there. Somebody was hanging bacon on their limbs. So that's an interesting idea. So maybe the dead carcass isn't the best idea, but that's what was used to bring in the flies, since it is a fetid flower. But it does make it a little bit harder on the pollination for folks. So these are all those things you have to get past to be able to get this really unique crop. Let's see, grafted trees. Are expensive. A little baby one is $25, $35 easily for first year graft. Seedlings are much cheaper, but you will not know the outcome for 5 to 7 years because it takes that long for that to bear. There is a high percentage from some of the studies that I read that if you take seeds from a large fruited plant, that you have a higher percentage of large fruited babies. There again, that is only from my reading. Of course, with any seed, there's a hit and a miss. You can always get the little tiny, quarter-pound fruit, or you might hit the next big 1 pounder and just be happy as a lark. So, I mean, with seeds, you run that, but you do have that diversity. And I grow a lot of seedlings, either to graft on or plant out for trials. To keep that pollinator and that genetic diversity alive. Pawpaw trees and wild patches are root suckers from a single original tree. With poorly developed root systems per individual shoot, these root suckers do not transplant well at all. I mean, yes, do not try to transplant them. But what's interesting, though, is if somebody is planting a new pawpaw orchard in Ohio, they will go in and clear out a patch and thin to that maybe 15-foot spacing, all these suckers, and leave more light into them. And they can get a ready-made orchard in like no time at all. And this is just clearing out a brush lot and leaving them get more light and let them sprout quicker and fruit very soon. And that's how some orchards in that area are created without planting grafted trees, let's say. So propagation, this is way easier than people make it on there. So I collect the seeds and of course get them out of the fruit, and they're sort of like this little fleshy material on them. So I run them through a colander with a real soft brush and just get that little coating off of there, and then take those seeds and then put them in some just moist peat moss in baggies in the refrigerator and just forget about them for a while. Bring them out in the spring, so that's probably 2-3 months in the cold period, and sow them in, I use a square tray, fairly deep. I think it's like a 4 or 5 inch tray. Put them in there, just loosely sown, and you get almost 100% germination for me. I mean, it is nothing hard, really easy. These are my root stocks. If I'm going to then put some really nice grafted varieties on top, or I'll put some out there in a row for some trial to see what kind of fruit I end up with on there. There is the propagation of budding or grafting. Kentucky State recommends early June for budding and grafting, and this is really important. When you graft them, my seedling probably has an inch of new growth in around June, and it's fairly warm, and that's the time to do them. And everything else has been done in, let's say, March, all my apples and pears that my grafting. So these are done way when it's warmer, and it's really key to have that 1 inch of growth already on your bottom rootstock that you're actually cutting off. I cleft graft, but you could do whip and tongue, whichever, bud them, whatever. But the callus, to get adequate callus growth, it needs to be really warm on there to knit together. So that is a real crucial point to grafting these. Here we just talked about this, the slightly foul smelling pawpaw flowers, and it is really a pretty foul smell. Are flying beetle pollinated. The reason that the fruit set is so inconsistent because of trying to get these attracted, the flying beetles. Old recommendations, we just talked about this, to hang the roadkill in the tree. And then I just put this little hand pollination in there because I did have one orchard contact me that was actually doing this. They went out through there, and there's some great videos online to watch about when the stigmas are receptive and so on. And they were having really good luck with this. Of course, they were pollinating trees that were like, fairly young, blooming for the first time. I can't imagine, when the tree's now 15 foot tall or so, climbing up to do that, but it is an option. Let's just say that. Very few pest problems. This is what I really love about this. The deer do not eat pawpaws. I've had some young fawns nibble on them a little bit, but I believe, again, these cancer fighting drugs that are found in most parts of the plant make them fairly resistant to this. The same with the insects, the peduncle borer, which really burrows into the pawpaw flower. These other pests I've never seen, the earwig, slugs, San Jose scale, tent caterpillars, not big issues. I think it's really unique how the tree is pollinated, how it grows, how you have to be a little more innovative with marketing, and things that were big in the old days now are not so hard to do these days because we can transport frozen bricks of fruit, so quicker. Here, it's about the harvesting and post-harvesting. They ripen very quickly, but bruise very easily. I've seen pickers use a modified, like one of those fruit baskets that you like have on a long pole and you reach up and you sort of pull down on the fruit, except they've totally lined the basket with like foam, and they've cut it down to two fingers that are foam wrapped so that you can actually just tug on each fruit. It is something that either they drop off the tree and you pick them that way, you shake the tree lightly, or you just slightly pull on them. If you pull off fruit that is not ripe, it will never finish ripening and actually just be the worst mess you've ever made. They will not finish the ripening cycle. So it is really key about this. And I put some information here about it's like a slight softness when gently squeezed, and it releases from the stem when pulled. So that's why that little 2-finger picker works really good. Easily bruised, and once they're black, they're like a banana for folks. It's like nobody's going to buy them. So you really want to get them at a nice stage where they're just soft but fairly green with maybe just a little bit of black on them. People will buy. Folks put deep straw hay underneath the trees to cushion the fall because it is a heavy fruit with these new 1 pound plus varieties. You picture that falling out of the tree, it can actually smash itself just by its sheer weight, where in the old days, the half-pound fruit would fall off by the hundreds and you could just come through and collect every morning and no worries. Let's see here. We talked about the cushioning to protect the fruit. Fruit picked right before they're fully ripe. I mean, once they're fully ripe, sort of like a banana is really fully ripe when it's black, not when it's yellow. We actually eat that at a time when it's really not ripe. Same with the pawpaws. When it's really ripe is when it's that black, but that's also at the point where it's going to go past really quick. So you can ripen them at room temperature, or maybe 2 to 4 days or 3 weeks in the refrigerator. I've never had them last 3 weeks. That's one of those things on here where I sort of disagree with. They go pretty fast. Iowa State is researching mechanical pulp extraction and freezing techniques, and this is really where the market is. So if you're a fresh market person taking them, you can get premium dollars at the market. Sell them by weight. Ohio Pawpaw Festival, Jerry Lehman, who has now passed, unfortunately, he would take them to market, to the Pawpaw Festival, weigh them, and charge you something like it was $3-4 a pound. And folks were selling out 70 some bucks for a couple of pawpaws. But that's what it's intriguing enough for folks to try. And it is really sweet enough that folks really come back for it. We make a pawpaw jam once in a while that people just really, with pawpaw cinnamon, just love it and just come back year after year asking for that. So it is something that people search you out for. But the pulp, long story short, was they can sell these bricks of pulp now and ship them across the country for the brewing and the bakeries now. So it has now expanded beyond the Appalachians to other areas and really becoming a high market. And I think Neil Peterson, who sells a lot of the really hybrids, now has a big market for Cyan in European countries. Is really taken off in across the world. Marketing, you gotta be careful in the handling, not to bruise it. Because it's so nutritious, might be a good sales tool, make a good poster or blackboard text on that. Highlight the high in potassium, the vitamin C, the riboflavin. People like the little story about Lewis and Clark. People love background stories. Let's see here, recipes for the buyer to take home. Pawpaw is a source of phytochemicals called antistogens with anti-carcinogenic properties. We talked about Kentucky State doing the bark trials where they're stripping off the bark, sort of like the birch bark canoes, and they're using that in these chemical trials for the cancer fighting properties. So it's really taken off in those ends of the world too for research. And let's see, let's end there. So Laura, any questions on pawpaws?
All right, let me go back through. Mostly people just been kind of commenting about what they're doing, and I think that's wonderful.
Yay.
Did we have any, Andrew was wondering about suggested varieties and sources to find them.
The Kentucky State ones are probably the biggest ones right now. And you could probably get those through Northwoods. Oh boy, probably a few other specialty nurseries, One Green World, Rain Tree, a couple of those really bigger places. And then I mentioned Neil Peterson a couple of times. Neil has a whole series like Susquehanna, Potomac, Wabash, Talladega, a whole bunch of different, Tallahassee, sorry, I call it Talladega, Tallahassee. And he has a patent on all those varieties that he did the research for, and you can find them through a lot of the growers also. And those are called the Peterson pawpaws. And then a bunch of the old varieties like North Carolina 1 or NC1, Sunflower, Tay2, Wells. And you'll find them. I sell some of the older varieties here at my nursery that I graft, and many places online you can find some of those older varieties. I still like them for their flavor. Sometimes size isn't everything on a pawpaw. I mean, yeah, it is for cleaning and something like that, but boy, some of the unique flavor profiles of some of the older varieties and some of the colors make really unique desserts if it's orange versus pale yellow versus white. Yeah, you'll find many of these varieties, but Kentucky State's probably the biggest breeding program right now.
And I'll just also throw in that Northwoods does carry a lot of the Neil Peterson varieties, and they have the best prices from what I've seen. They have wholesale prices of like sometimes as low as 10 to 12 bucks per grafted tree if you're buying, 30 or 40 or 50. So, it's relatively accessible from them.
Nice.
I have to admit, I'm very impressed that there are that many varieties and that there's an active university breeding program on these plants. I did not realize that, so that's very encouraging.
Roger? Oh, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Roger, Chuck Annis. Question on, do you have a particular variety that you like to use for scion wood, or?
Oh boy, people really just ask for name varieties, Chuck. Of course, the ones that are under patent, the Kentucky State varieties, which I think there's 3 of them released, and Peterson has 8 or 9. You have to get that scion wood either from the breeder, where you pay royalties for it there, or you get, like Eric said, from Northwoods, where you actually buy the trees already started. And then any of the old varieties, Kentucky State right now has a repository of all the genetics, and I think the North American Pawpaw growers has a sort of a similar of all the genetics that they've collected over the years. And if you, especially the North American Pawpaw growers, if you actually join that organization, you can request so much free scion wood each year, I believe, as part of the group to graft with. But yeah, no specific one for me. People just ask for names.
Okay.
And of course, I do a lot of those older varieties just to keep those genetics alive, basically.
And what do you use for rootstock?
Oh, all seedlings started from seed.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, I'd just like to make one comment about Roger. I've been attending, well, pre-COVID, he has run some just phenomenal programs. So anybody that wants to learn about different plants and medicinal herbs and that, this is a guy to keep in contact with his website and see what Schuyler County is running, because he does a phenomenal job. And I wanted to just pass that on. I've been to several of them. At my farm, we are now growing a tremendous amount of medicinal herbs and doing really well with them. And part of that was from one of your programs. So keep up the good work, Roger.
Hey, thanks, Chuck. Nice.
That's great to have some real testimonial.
Yeah. This is Eric again, and I just have one thing that I would like to throw in, not to cast too much shade on the pawpaw metaphorically. I love the fruit. It's one of my favorite trees for all the reasons Roger mentioned. I have a 6-year-old planted with about 40 trees that's started to produce. And one thing a friend of mine brought to my attention last year, which I shared a reference paper with Laura, which I'm sure she can share with the group. So the bark and the fruit and the seeds, to a certain extent, in the skin, all have lots of cancer fighting compounds. Some of them, if you ingest them in certain quantities, can actually be problematic. And so there are, I forget which class of, but I think, acetomycin and some of the acetogens are, if you have a little bit too high of a concentration, there are some neurotoxicological potential problems there. So I shared a paper. It's just something to read. It's something that, for me, I've taken it to mean don't eat gobs of overripe fruit because there could be problems there. And it's, from a marketing perspective, it's really hard because you don't want to share anything that says like, hey, this fruit could give you cancer, because that could get out of hand really quickly. But it's also just good to be informed. Go read the reference paper for yourself and make your own decisions as how you want to proceed.
Thanks, Eric. Actually, I think that's really wise. We at Cornell Cooperative Extension and Cornell University umbrella, we don't talk about medicinal plants as far as using them very often, because the university is so, they just don't like to talk about that. So we want to just make sure that people understand that a lot of these plants have fabulous attributes as far as your health, but like anything, like any medicine, and that's what we're talking about is a medicine, nutraceuticals can also go in the opposite direction. So just be really careful. Eric's papers is on the Teachable site, and I think it would be a really great thing to read just to kind of help give you perspective. So thanks, Eric. I'm going to ask one more question because I'm really interested in the answer to this one. Brian is wondering, how well suited are pawpaws to high tunnel production in your opinion, Roger?
Wow. I have not seen it done, so I can't speak on it that I've seen it done. I mean, the high tunnel production that you see nowadays is more for the cherry production because the fruit, of course, is so environmentally like the birds and it cracks and all these kind of problems, so that moving cherries inside makes like this really like, oh, this is like a brilliant idea. You know, you could have you pick inside in the rain and, you know, so, but pawpaws, and I'm just putting this from my perspective, as I don't see enough, unless I'm outside the zone, enough reason to move them inside because there isn't a lot of pests. There's not a lot of diseases. The deer don't bother them so much. So, I mean, besides the zone, that would be the only reason I would think where you would try to experiment with that.
Yeah, and the zone, from my experience, the zone in winter temperatures, a lot of times it's colder inside a closed high tunnel, unless it's heated, of course, which
Right.
could screw up chilling units and dormancy breaking and all of that on a temperate plant. So it's really tricky. But you might, if Brian is having problems with heavy rain or other kinds of things, you might consider exclusion netting, because that is one of the attributes of exclusion netting. And the other problem with both exclusion netting or under a tunnel is that the growth, the vegetative growth of plants under those protected culture is pretty impressive. So if you've already got a plant that's pushing the limits for height and requires a lot of pruning to keep it under a tunnel, the tunnel environment is only going to exacerbate that challenge. So just keep that in mind. I think there was, there might have been one or two other. We have a question again about varieties, about ripening in zone 4. And I think that's definitely a question. And Allison, we use bumblebees in tunnels to pollinate lots of other crops. They might actually help. They might do fine with pawpaws inside a tunnel. I don't know if they would go to those flowers
Yeah,
or not.
that would be the question, is whether they actually go to that flower
Yeah.
smell, being that it's more fly and beetle. I
Right.
don't know if the bumblebees would visit it. So
Yeah. All right. We'll keep going because I know we're only halfway through. So hang in there, folks. Take a little quick stretch break while Roger moves into this next topic.
All right, persimmons. So this is a newer crop from my farm, at least on there. It's really interesting as I study these. And I'm going to go back to a story, not like Lewis and Clark, but when I was first started at the nursery, a friend brought me these ripe persimmons that I just had to try. They were the sweetest things. And I read all these stories back in high school. I was still that fruit nerd person, and I love fruit stuff. And I ate one, and to this day, I can still remember him laughing and the chalk taste that I can still taste today. So if you've ever eaten an unripe persimmon, you know what I'm talking about. And it was a really cruel joke, but but it made me understand when a fruit is ripe and when it's not ripe, just because it looked real pretty and everything. So yeah, there's some really things to learn about some of this fruit, like the pawpaw and the persimmons, of when ripe is. And like I said, I share that story because to this day I can still taste that flavor. And it should have turned me off from persimmon forever, but I still love persimmons on there. So There is two kinds. So we'll talk about this a little bit, that most folks, when they ask about persimmon, they're thinking Asian persimmon, which would not grow for us at all up in this area. So I am only talking about the American persimmon today, not the Asian persimmon. So just to clarify that at all. It's a very slow grower, moderate sized tree native to Kentucky. Fruit are about 1 to 2 inches in diameter. Unripe fruit, which is high in tannins, has a bitter, astringent flavor, and I can attest to that for you. The golden orange to red fruit are very sweet when fully ripened, and the astringency is really reduced. Cultivated varieties may improve quality and lose the astringency earlier in the fall, and that is really key for a variety. Know what you have. Boy, there is so much going on in the persimmon world right now. We've mentioned Buzz a couple times up in Vermont. He has actually done some persimmon explorations at the old John Hershey Nursery in southern Pennsylvania, I believe in that Reading, Downingtown kind of area. And Hershey had done huge fruit breeding. And long story short is, his nursery, which is like you're going way back in time, is now a housing development with basically parts left forested. And it's these rare trees like mulberries and persimmons and just these ancient nut trees and stuff, which Eric could probably talk more on. But hidden in this development is part of the Hershey Nursery. So they go down there and the fruit explorers collect seeds from these varieties. And I was able to get some really cool varieties from those, some cyanwood, including a black fruited variety, which just intrigues me for the jam production. I'm always looking for colors and things that could really make a unique jam. And in that search, I found a variety called Chuchupaca, I think, which is a blue persimmon, I believe. Just hardy to my zone, that I grafted last year, and can't wait to try that. So there is multitude of different colors and flavors, and I'll get to some things I learned about them even in this talk, which I'll go over with you here. Very adaptable tree. I got to give it kudos. It survives anything from poor soil to river bottoms, part shade to full sun. It is a workhorse of a tree. It's just, when folks want that Asian persimmon at 12 foot and you're selling them a 50-foot tree, you know, it's a lot bigger yard plant, not just this little tiny shrub plant. And that is a big educational thing you have to tell your customers. Or if you're just growing it for value added, it's on your place, so it doesn't matter. Tree spacing is 20 foot between the trees and the rows, and 20 feet between trees in the row and 27 feet between rows. I think I did mine 20 by 30 on my spacing. Well watered for the first summer, and that's really crucial on a lot of things that you're getting started. 1 inch of rain per week on an establishment is usually good. They are somewhat drought tolerant. They can be pruned to a modified center or leader from becoming too tall. I've not found that to be really easy to do. There again, my farm. So I am not a big, I guess because, and I didn't share with you folks, I am now at probably 600 fruiting trees and 3 acres of berries. So getting around to everything is not exactly the easiest thing. So pruning to a central leader would be great if I was in a persimmon production. But I'm trying to keep up with everything, and one man show, except for my daughter now helping me, and my wife's in the kitchen full time with the jams. So you do what you can do. And that's the story for this whole class is do what you can do. Persimmon can be propagated from seeds. I remember Jerry Lehman sending me seeds when he was alive, and he's like, find your clayest soil on the farm, put it in coffee cups and push this seed down into there that I just sent you, and it'll grow. And I'll be darned if it didn't just grow in that rock hard clay coffee cup. Everyone germinated and grew. And then basically you just rip the styrofoam cup off and plant that little dirt pod into your soil, and And that's how all my persimmons got started. And then I grafted onto a lot of them just to find some bigger fruited varieties. But you can do root cutting, suckers, grafting is which I do now. And I did some fall budding last year and actually looked like I had pretty good success with doing some fall, which is sort of late summer buds. And that seemed to work really well also. So pretty easy to propagate. We talked about the fruit colors, shapes, astringencies, early and varieties. I wanted to, the second part here is what was key for me is my first batch of persimmon jam came out with all these black flecks and I didn't know what we did wrong. We thought we burned it in production or the pan chipped off or something like that. And this is an eye opener that there is varieties that contain black flecks in the pulp. So, you know, here we am. I'm still learning every day also. But here's varieties they recommended: Proc, Killen, Claypool, I-115, Dollywood, Early Golden, John Rick. These are all varieties that are pretty common on the market. Some of these number ones probably are now named, of course, since this article. And just that Claypool name there in the middle, if anybody is a persimmon follower, Jim Claypool had the original like breeding program for persimmons. He was the go-to just in Indiana. And when Jim passed away, luckily Jerry Lehman had been like working with Jim and basically helped take over that planting and continued. Jerry was a little bit more like, this variety needs to go, and he yanked out a lot of stuff and really kept the good stuff, which Mr. Claypool was basically into seed production and had just thousands of seedling varieties. So Jerry took it into a more concise, like, I'm breeding for this or this, and now Jerry has passed, unfortunately, and we'll see what that orchard becomes now. But some of these varieties easily between Claypool and Lehman were the big breeders in history, and there wasn't a lot of them. You can't name. England's Nursery might be another one down in Kentucky. This third paragraph is going to get a little tricky here, and I'm going to try to go through this with you. So persimmons are normally dioecious, as is the trees produce either male or female flowers on separate trees. In most nurseries, you will buy male and female varieties. We're going to throw a little thing into here, but there is a 90 chromosome American persimmon that is native to the northern part of the US and a 60 chromosome that's native more to that Kentucky area. Jerry always told me the 90 chromosome had a little bit more fuzz to the leaf and was definitely the ones I wanted to search out more than the 60 chromosome. There's nothing wrong with the 60. It's just the 90 had a little more northern gene to it there. So down here below, most of the named varieties are the 90 chromosome type that set fruit without pollination now. And I wrote a couple of folks when I was putting this presentation together about this, and they were all pretty much like, never really thought about it, but yeah, the 90 chromosome don't need a pollinator, but the 60 chromosomes definitely need the male and the female. So this is that little tricky part on there, and if it doesn't need pollination, that means it is actually, you know, like a wasp, or I mean, you think of bananas and figs we're going to talk about next, but the pollination is carried on through a different system, which we're not going to get into this whole biology thing. But it's real key for when you're looking. You may want to, if you're in a northern climate, you may want to be looking for 90 chromosome types. And like I said, most of the named ones probably are the 90 chromosome. Versus the 60, but you will find both on the market there. So don't mean to confuse everybody, but it's neat to know this whole background story. And there was some work that when I was reading that the 90 chromosome don't set a lot of seeds, yet you buy seeds for the 90 chromosome type. So it's a really strange, and these fruits, you'll learn a lot about the pawpaw, the persimmon, what make them sort of obscure fruits that aren't planted in every orchard, you know, why apple and pears, but you need to look for these other things and find them and have the diversity in your orchards for sure. So harvest and storage. Let's see, they're propagated from seeds, producing a crop in about 4 to 9 years. Grafted trees can begin fruiting in 3 years, which is why I like the grafts, but it may take as many as 10 years to come into full production. Fruit is hand-picked with care to maintain the cap on the fruit. If it's to be marketed fresh, people want that cap on top. That deep straw bed system, again, in the pawpaw orchard was used a lot in persimmon orchards, because here's a nice little liquid bomb coming out of the tree from real far up when it was really ripe. And if it landed and splatted, then there was all your profit, and you would get this things inside the fruit you didn't want in there, like deer poop or whatever. So putting that deep straw bed on there, or I see nets used to capture these to try to keep it from splattering, is all part of your production cycle. Let's see here. Named varieties can yield as much as 90 to 100 pounds of fresh fruit per tree. That's amazing. That's a lot of pounds of fruit. Mature fruit may be yellow, orange, reddish, or blue. We talked about that. They become very soft when ripe. It is popularly believed that a hard frost is required to sweeten the fruit, but actually persimmons just require a long period of ripening. So it's the length of time more so than just that frost required to sweeten it. It's that amount of time that it's on the tree that actually really ripens it. Edible fruits often hang on the tree through fall. I've seen pictures of folks climbing the tree with snow on the ground, picking their persimmons or shaking them loose right into the wintertime. And the fruit does get that shriveled. I was going to comment on that about yesterday. When the fruit of kiwis shriveled is at its sweetest form, not when it's that shiny grape-like look. Actually, when it's shriveled, it's the most ready for eating. And same here, when they have that nice sort of unpleasant look, is actually when they're really, really good. So it can be stored above freezing for approximately 2 or 3 weeks. Ripe fruit that is still astringent can be treated with ethylene or frozen. And I find that to be really these frozen bricks of puree, again, help get rid of that astringency. And also drying. Folks like to dry. I'm not a big drying fan for persimmons, but it is eaten that way in many parts of the world. And that supposedly removes the astringency also. So there's just some marketing things for you. We talked about the Asian persimmon is the most commonly grown, but we're talking the American. There's a lot of ongoing efforts now that we have all these new varieties to commercialize. And of course, this is that brewery thing is really that, and some of the unusual fruit beer or fruit wines. So all these persimmon pawpaws can just make can make some great local beverages. So of course the emphasis is on local, regional, and slow foods. I told you my hat is local foods. All these fruit are becoming big things for my area with the wine region. Folks are putting in additional crops that help supplement and make unusual fruit flavored wines. But you can market fresh, can be not at my market. You can't find persimmons found at farmers markets, unfortunately, but we want to see that someday for sure. Persimmon can be processed and sold as pulp, which we just talked about. Persimmon pudding, cookies, cakes, custards, ice cream, sherbets, preserves, and that would have doubled back to the pawpaw, would have been all these same things, except for the fruit may be dried on persimmon where it's not on pawpaw. If you're marketing at farmers market and direct marketing channels, you should provide storage, ripening, and use information, and a big education to consumers that are unfamiliar with the crop. And you'll run into that a lot. Folks are just looking for blueberry or raspberries, and you have all these unusual fruits on your stand. And once they try it, they're going to come back. But it's getting them to try that initially. And that's where the niche markets are, because you do get good money for persimmons and pawpaws at market. So you can make some serious, but you have all these production things that you need to address in getting them ready to get to the market, first of all. So your investments, land prep, purchases seedlings or grafted trees. Irrigation system for that first year is really important. Just put this on here that an Indiana producer knocks the fruit to the tree onto tarps. Deep straw beds are used. 2 harvesters can pick about 20 pounds of usable fruit with the calyxes, which we were talking about. Leave that on top or removed. This must be going into production instead of to fresh market. Growers may be able to realize a much higher return per pound at the niche crop, well-managed planting and well-targeted niche marketing. What it's saying there is you may not need 2 acres of persimmons to be a really good niche marketer. You maybe have 20 to 30 trees, maybe even 10, and do really well rather than being big time, which we're just not. I mean, persimmon plantings, I'm not seeing acres going in, but I'm seeing folks at least try some trees into their orchards. Pests and diseases, almost considered pest-free, disease-free, very few problems. A few of the insects that it mentions on there: Thistleid, persimmon borer, fall webworm, bagworm, hickory horn devil, twig girdler, ambrosia beetle is the one that's probably popping up the most on it there. No main diseases. Of course, with some fruit as sweet as this is, songbirds, raccoons, opossums, squirrel, deer for the fruit, but not really for the plant. Will feed on the persimmon fruit, and they were almost the exact same list that you would put down for pawpaw. Mainly these bigger mammals like raccoons, squirrels, possums love the fruit, especially raccoons. Let's see what else I got here. Before we get into figs, let's take questions.
All right, great. We had a little bit of chat going on, just kind of mostly around the chromosome and whether or not that will impact the fruitfulness or the self-fruiting ability. I think I did not realize that ethylene, treating these fruit with ethylene would remove the astringency. That's pretty amazing, I think. I don't know how that would impact if you pick them just barely ripe. Could you ethylene treat them and then have them be less astringent, and therefore, and also maybe that would improve their ripeness? Do you think?
Yeah, boy, I don't know enough about treating them on there. I've seen some good publications, especially from ATTRA, ATTRA, and it's an acronym for some long. They have a lot of good publications, especially on persimmon and marketing and so on.
Okay, yeah. Well, they're a really interesting crop, and I see them, I think people are eating them. I see them even in where I live in Granville, New York, in the Price Chopper every once in a while. So I feel like there is a market. People have some familiarity with them, and they could really take off if we could figure out how to grow them.
Right.
There's a question from Susan about Nikita's gift persimmon.
That's I believe one of the hybrids, which is a cross between the American and the Asian. And I'm just going to go with I planted, maybe it was Rosianka, which is another cross on there, and had no survivability in my winter. So I'm a 5B, I think, here, and it did not make it. So not sure if anybody else has any experience with the crosses or not, but I stopped planting the crosses because I lost every one the first winter. So
I have both of the crosses that I'm aware of, Nikita's Gift and Rosianka. Nikita's Gift it's pretty dubious. I'm on the cusp between 5B and 6A here in Ulster County, and a friend of mine who I got the scion wood from, he has a tree of Nikita's Gift that's probably 15 years old, but suffers constant dieback. Every once in a while gets a few fruit, because a lot of the time when you have trees that are that marginal, once the wood develops a thicker diameter, it can take a colder temperature, but the young shoots will die back to, sometimes almost all the new growth of last year will die back, and then you won't get any fruit again for another, year or two. So And I have a Rosa Yanka that has survived one winter so far. So we'll see how that one works. But yeah, they're pretty marginal. I think if you're in 6A, you're probably good to go with both of them. But in zone 5B, it's pretty much a no-go.
All right, thanks, Eric. I do have a couple more questions for Roger about size of trees and fruiting. And so Brian is wondering, can you keep these trees a little bit smaller with pruning? And then, because this is going to be the next question, how old is the fruiting wood? Is it 2-year-old fruiting wood or 1-year-old?
So that one slide, I believe, was on trying to keep that modified central leader to help keep the height down on there. Like I said, I would delve into production a little bit more on pruning, which I didn't talk about a lot on those because it's fairly new for me also on there. And I believe the wood, yeah, would have to be older wood to second year, I believe. I don't know, Eric, do you know that one?
Yeah, second year wood is where a lot of the fruit is born. From what I've seen on all my trees, yeah, it's the second year wood, but older wood can also support it. It's not like peaches where it has to be second year wood, but yeah, that's how I've seen it.
Okay,
Nice.
so there is a possibility of keeping them a little bit smaller with some heavy pruning and still get some
Yeah, I definitely
crop.
think so. And I have most of my trees are all seedlings. I probably have 30 American persimmons that were seedlings, and they have an unbelievable variation in their growth habits. Some of them really look like an orchard tree and have like, a hemisphere shape, like a upside down bowl, and other ones are going straight upwards. Some of them have fuzzy shoots. Some of them are perfectly smooth. So, there are a lot of named varieties out there, but I think there's also still a lot of value in exploring with the genes and just seeing kind of what's there. There's a lot, and they're all good. I've never had a persimmon that I didn't like. It's just about that, the fruit to seed ratios and the size and all of that.
Great. How about one, I do want to mention that Allison is mentioning that she's growing these in a greenhouse. So that's very interesting. And Jennifer has a question about how old does a plant need to be to graft onto a seedling rootstock?
Oh boy, I think I grew out before I grafted. It was, boy, at least 2 years. It might have been the third. Well, I'm going to say 2 years, I believe, was my seedlings before I grafted onto them, because they were just wispy thin the first year, but sized up a little nicer the second year. And they were still in containers. They weren't put out into the field at that point.
Right. And a lot of times that, Jennifer, that would really depend on just the rate of growth and physical diameter and ability to actually graft them. It's not necessarily a physiological age. It's just that physical ability. And then the rootstock will help move it forward a lot of times. So Steve is mentioning that he found it easier to maintain trees at a 12 to 14 inch height or feet height and still get production. And I think we're good. I think we're good right now. And we can move into my personal favorites, figs. So I'm hoping that Roger has some real tips for somebody in a cold zone 4.
We'll help you out, Laura. No worries. How's our time, Laura? Are we doing good?
We're doing good. Yep.
Yay. Okay, we're trying to keep it on time for you folks, and hope you're all still with me and enjoying this. So let's go into one of my favorites too. Figs have grown at my home from 2 Chicago Hardies that I tried at work in the cooperative extension garden. And of course, as any person that has a lot of plants, your first winter, they got the full chicken wire and mulch, and I think it was like 4 foot of mulch in these really beautiful tubes, and came back wonderfully the next year. And the second year, I probably went with like half that amount, and I don't even know if the chicken wire got put on. And by the third year, this was a trial for hardiness, not for fruit now. So just to explain the little difference here, And by the third season, I didn't put any mulch on because of laziness and doing other things in the garden, and they still came back. So I have Chicago Hardies now, and this is probably year 9, 10, that die the whole way back to the ground and come up and get probably 12 foot tall during this summer in Montour Falls, New York, which, you know, it's not by the lake, but it's a little warmer. But this is an island that was between a parking lot and 2 roads is where my garden's oriented. And without any care, they're hardy as nails. Now, if I was doing them for fruit production, I am short by about 3 weeks every year of getting my 200 ripe figs because of the getting the season long enough, because they die back so far. So that is a key with figs, is you have to have them sprout above ground on older wood to produce. Coming out of the ground brand new every year, I get all this lush growth, but it makes it too long for the fruit to get ripe. And we'll show you some pictures of why that is on here. So let's move into it here. So when somebody buys a fig at my nursery, I basically say you should be putting it in a container, because the sooner you can get it out in the spring to get some sunlight and growing is going to lengthen that season for you. And the more you can take that container in the fall when there's frosty nights, you can bring that fig inside and then put it back out the next day. And there might be 2 weeks before we get the next frost, right? So to ripen your figs, you want to be able to move it back and forth a little bit. People always say, well, you can't keep it in a container that long. My first nursery I worked at in New York State was an Italian family, and I took care of, I believe it was great grandpa's fig, and I was told if I left it die, it was my job. I'd be gone. So I babied this fig with anything, but it was 3rd generation in a container. And every so often we would pull it out of the container and chunk pie slices out basically and restuff new potting soil in there to keep it going. But it had been in this container for years before I came, and it ripened these figs. I was just amazed. It's just like, this thing is amazing. Didn't know what variety it was. And one of the things we'll talk about here is I was given this fig to take care of in this whiskey barrel that I had to roll around and stuff. So by the time I left, I had put that thing onto some caster wheels and we rolled it everywhere. So I got it really down to a science taking care of this fig. And one of the main insects we'll talk about is spider mites. Was really, I had to fight them all the time. That was the hardest thing to keep this fig alive with the spider mites, because it was in a greenhouse environment. And if it had been at a homeowner, I mean, not as likely to have gotten the mites like you do when you're in a greenhouse environment with like impatiens and geraniums and all these annuals that attract everything. So this poor fig was living in the middle of that kind of condition. So yeah, find the right container, and in our area, the container is what's going to work. Wood, clay, ceramic, recycled, just give it plenty of drainage holes. To avoid heavy decorative pots, it might be difficult to move once they're filled with soil, water, and a fig tree. So the decorative pots can become quite heavy. And because I had the wood barrel, I was able to put those caster wheels on. I would have had to do something different for a decorative pot. Don't waste space. Start small. I tell people if they buy a 1 gallon fig from me, they're going to move it up to a 2 gallon slowly. And it does this little, I call it this volcano heave. In the middle of the pot, the plant starts to push its way out of the container, and that's telling me there's too many roots in that container. Time to move it up to the next size container. And until you get to that point where you're actually chunking soil out and rejuvenating it that way. So the plant will tell you when it's ready to go up to the next size container. And here at the bottom, it says they can grow as large as something that's going to be a whiskey barrel. And that's what this Italian fig was in, this half whiskey barrel. Beautiful plant though. And like I said, I got hooked on figs at that point. I never thought you could grow figs in New York, and man, it was amazing to eat fresh figs in New York. And now I get to enjoy them all the time because I'm probably at 30 varieties now. experimenting with here, and just, you know, some are grown for the hardiness, but also some are grown where I actually do a lot of babying in the winter because of the exquisite fruit on there. So here's a container on wheels. You can buy these online anywhere and move your fig around. Because like I said, when you're moving it in and out in the spring and in and out in the fall till you get your figs, you want to be able to do that fairly easy and not kill your back trying to move it. Let's see here. Water it well. Add a layer of mulch, which helps keeps your moisture in. Put the fig tree in a sunny spot in your yard and keep well watered. Usually it's on the deck most of the time for most people, or patio. During hot summer weather, your fig tree may need more frequent watering, possibly even daily, because of the containers. People don't realize a clay pot can get really, really hot versus a wooden pot, and it can really dry out. And when it'll say here, if your tree's leaves begin to yellow, chances are it's being overwatered. It can also be too dry because of the kind of container that it's in. But you definitely don't want to overwater it. If you stick your finger in, it's really damp down in there. Figs really tolerate more of a dry soil than they do a wet soil. So do not overwater it. And the yellow leaf is telling you one way or another to check your watering. With that being said, a lot of times folks also have a fig that comes out of the garage or out of the house from the wintertime that already has leafed out. That actually can sunburn really easy too when you're bringing it outside and getting its first sun for the year. And I get some leaf scorch. Tell people, don't panic. It's going to be fine. It'll push out the next set of leaves. These are really resilient plants. They're really truly trees by how big they can get. And they come back from a lot of different things. And I've lost every leaf on a fig tree from scorch, and it'll re-leaf back out with minimal care. So winterizing, we'll talk about. That's the main thing. I'm not going to bore you with this whole wasp pollination of figs on there. Plus, you would probably never eat a fig again if you knew the little male unwinged wasps were dead inside the fig. So I don't want to gross you all out, but they actually chew out a hull so the female can escape out and go on to the next fruit. So it's a whole really neat little life cycle kind of thing. So I just threw that in there for fun. Okay, people always ask me, what does this Breba fig mean? And when I first started, I decided, oh, it must be the variety. It's called Breba, but no. So the Breba is the first crop of figs that grows on previous year's wood, and it's ripened real early in the year. So you'll have this big thing like this Breba in the hand here that's ripe like way before the rest of the fruit is, and the rest of the fruit won't even be ready till fall. Let's see here. The one here was taken on April 9th, 2013, not at my place, but so that shows you that one's ripe. You should be checking early for your Brebas. And then your other crop will be in that August, September out there. So that's what a Breba is. It's a fig. I've actually had some of my cuttings that are in the greenhouse right now rooting push out baby Brebas because of the piece of wood that I had rooting. Push a little Breba out of the parafilm tape. They wanted to actually start fruiting a while, so I had to remove them off. We'll talk a little bit more about how I graft here. They don't require routine pruning, but you can prune them to the size that works for your space. And that's really crucial. Some people want a tall and almost leggy kind of plant. Other folks want this real short and bushy. Of course, there's varieties that do grow differently. Some of the more bushy ones, Petite Negra, and a couple other varieties, Beers Black, a couple other ones are really quite wide and sort of short, but other varieties have really reached and get that 12-foot height like Chicago Hardy like really quickly during the year. Here it's telling you 10 to 15 feet tall or larger. Boy, your container will actually allow for different heights. So if you want to keep it smaller, use a smaller container. Let's see here, 6 to 8 feet is most manageable, and that is a great height in a container, so it's not blowing over on your deck every day. Also, the more height you have, this more the wind it would catch and blow. We just talked about the bushy shape on some varieties. That's very common. Let's see, in the fall, when the leaves start to turn and fall, ideally before the first killing frost, it's time to move the tree into an unheated basement. So let me go over this by my version versus on here. This is just for your knowledge. But so in the fall, the whole thing you want is ripe fruit. So the tree goes in and out and in and out for frost until you ripen those figs, and they ripen a lot nicer in the sunlight. So they're not going to ripen real well in your garage or your patio or inside patio. So get that fruit right. Then it's really crucial to leave that fig get a good frost, because it is just like a maple tree. It'll go these brilliant yellow leaves, and then they will all drop off. And that is the stage that it moves inside for. It is really crucial to get that good, nice heavy kill. I mean, it's not like you're leaving it out there in 0 degrees. It's just that first frost after fruiting is done. And then the tree is bare. I'm a big fan of the unheated garage. The next is the unheated dirt basements, which nobody has anymore, but they were perfect. Then the shed, and once in a while, even a barn that has some animals for that little minimal warmth. And I just basically wrap them real good. You got to watch for mice. Sometimes they'll crawl in there during the winter time, but just wrap them so that really you're keeping them dormant is really what's happening there. The cold, we talked about my Chicago Hardies at work. They're not that cold. Like, they're not just going to die overnight from cold. It's going to have to be a really long time. And in those protected environments, like what we're talking about, and if you really feel your shed's too cold, I've seen people take bags of leaves and just duct tape it around the container for winter care. Everybody sort of finds their own little what works and what doesn't work. So the garage is the best. And people ask about watering. I throw some ice cubes on top of the pot. When it's warm enough for them to melt, the tree will probably absorb that moisture. If it's too cold, the ice cubes aren't going anywhere. So you can be a good way of watering over the winter without, you don't want to drown them for sure, because the plant is definitely not using up much moisture. And then, like I said, bring it back out in the spring, about a month before your last frost. So for us here, frost free is probably June. So bring it out in April, May, and start acclimating it out slowly. So let's see here. So we talked about the dormant period and the soil moisture, avoid drenching. So yeah, I went over all that for you. In the spring, move the figs out to the yard for a few hours every day. Take it back indoors for the evenings, especially if it has frost or it's really cold. And when the last frost date has passed, move the fig tree back to a sunny spot outdoors. And that's where it's going to live for the summer. Here's my little cuttings. I just wanted to show you guys a little bit about my production in there. So these cuttings were taken over the winter when it was dormant on my figs. I always use the new growth at the top, but people sell you cuttings. There's, oh my gosh, if you go on FigBid, I think figbid.com, it is a fig bidding service. And I think the other day there was 800 cuttings available, or 800 vendors with cuttings available right now. And if you so wish to spend $60 on the cutting, you can, or you can get some on there fairly inexpensive. Just watch your shipping and so on. But it is amazing. If you are starting into your fig collection addiction like I did, you can get on there and spend lots of money, unfortunately. But so most of these are my stock plants here. This cutting was taken, and what I do is nip the bottom of the cutting right below like a bud scar or a leaf scar, you'd call it there. There's almost like a little line across, and I'm going right below there by about 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and make 3 slices down, maybe a 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch long, that go through that bud scar, 3 spots around there. And then you can either use willow water, you can use dip and grow, or you can use the powdered IBA rooting hormone. Stick them, well, right before I stick them, I wrap them. See my parafilm on there? Parafilm is a grafting tape that basically keeps moisture in your cuttings so they don't dry out. Last year, I did not use this and had a lot of cuttings dry out in the rooting stage because it takes so long to root. So, and you can see the plant pushes right out through the tape. This is new leaves busting out through there. It might not even have a huge root system there yet, and the parafilm rots away, or you can pull it off over time, whichever you want to do. Usually it rots away enough that it can sort of flake it off there. Let's see here. So that's pretty much my propagation. They're in a little heat chamber right there with a sand heat below. One little heater for the top. It's a little tiny frame. If you go to my Ort Family Farm Facebook page, I think there's pictures of that way back of how I set it up, and folks really like the setup part and seeing a little rooting chamber. I won't go over these health benefits too much. It's a lot like what we said about for the previous sea berries. They tell you a lot of different things on there. I just tell you that I enjoy eating them. There's been folks that say that they can take figs to market, and if they're large ones, sell them at $1 a piece, or a good profit for a little mini pint basket of them, which I haven't had enough to, because our jam takes up everything we can do. And I'll just go over that fig preserve jam is probably one of my number ones, just hard to keep in stock because I try to use the fresh figs. And we make a fig or frog jam. People like these little acronyms. And that's fig, raspberry, orange, and grape. And that's frog jam. So just favorites of ours, and people just really enjoy the story. There again, when you're at market, it's all about your story. Tell folks what you do. Tell them the story that you grow these figs in New York and the kiwi berries. That always gets people, like, when you tell them the story that these kiwi berries were grown right here in New York, and they didn't even know we could grow kiwis in New York. And just the whole story is how you get customers to interact with you and buy. So a couple of the things we talked about: mites. June beetle's never been a problem for me. Fig rust, fig mosaic virus here on the left. That's probably the most common one. And not to panic people, but whenever you probably even buy off a fig bed, most of the good vendors will tell you they might have already been exposed to fig mosaic virus. It is really that common in the plants, and without killing them, very, very, very common. So you might get cuttings that have some of this on there, and it's just, hate to say it, you live with it, but it is one of the things that you will find, and it does not affect production of the figs, more of a leaf internal. Sometimes they say with fertilizer, it can outgrow it. And so, yeah, I just wanted to tell people that exists out there. You might see that more common than anything else. Some of the ones I grow, and these by no means are the best varieties. If I was doing my top 3, Celeste, Beers Black, and Excel are 3 that are really, really, I guess that would be towards my hardiness end of things. When I was putting my figs away for fall in a little protected high tunnel, which is non-heated in a non-heated greenhouse, it's sort of a double environment. Beers Black still had all its leaves when everybody else was totally in bed a while. I mean, everybody else had lost all its leaves, and we're talking here, I put them away probably November-ish. Yeah, it still was in full leaf. So some varieties, just wherever they come from, and there really is figs from all around the world anymore. You can do so many. And before I take questions, the last thing I did here is on the farm, our first greenhouse that went in for trials, there was figs put in the ground, and they were 9 Italian figs from Massachusetts that went directly into the ground. And why I like containers better is I have to do so much wrapping, and you'll see that on my page where they're in sleeping bags right now. You got to rope them, you got to sleeping bag them, and put a little mulch around the root system. It is an unheated tunnel, so it does not get any additional heat. I grow blackberries to the left, and I had dewberries and strawberries underneath. So it was a whole hodgepodge trial, but figs and blackberries were definitely more profitable in the high tunnel than some of the other crops were for me. And these Italian figs are really rock hardy. they really just dive back to where the sleeping bag is. Anything that that leaves outside the sleeping bag usually gets frosted off. But if I can maintain the fig at like 3 foot or more of second year wood, I'll get new growth. It's as high as the high tunnel, which is probably 15 foot easily, and hundreds of figs. I mean, there was only one variety this year that didn't make it in time before it got too cold in the high tunnel. That was too late out of the 9 varieties. So, and then my hand down there at the bottom is a lot of the varieties. And like I said, now I'm up to like 30 varieties. So we just enjoy growing those. I put down some additional sources where I got some of the information, the testing sea berries. So I just won't go over all those, but those are things you can find. So I'll stop sharing my screen and take questions, Laura.
All right, thank you. And we do have some questions. Linda Dewey is wondering, how do you know when they're ripe?
Oh, good question. So I should have said that or had a good picture. So if you guys can see my hand, when the fig's growing off the stem, it's almost straight across like this. As soon as the neck, which is my wrist, allows that fig to come down, it actually becomes soft. That is when you can almost just touch it and it'll break off the plant. So when the neck bends down, that is when they're are usually the most ripe.
So I didn't say, there's a couple of really great chat remarks about varieties. We've been having a little back and forth about spotted wing Drosophila on figs. Have you ever seen SWD on figs?
I have not. Now, this is interesting that I guess as I grow outside more in containers, I'll find out. But the 9 original figs that were in the high tunnel, and this is just some ongoing research, not mine, but they say sometimes high tunnels, we talked about that heat yesterday. I think I saw a conversation about when you use exclusion, it gets really hot. Spotted wing doesn't like extremely hot conditions. And I found my blackberries and my figs, and I never had spotted wing on the figs anyhow, but the greenhouse, they almost go away for a period because it gets so hot in there. And actually, as it starts to cool back down is when they come into my late blackberries, but not during that real hot period. They said it really bothers them breeding and so on. And they really totally do. They leave my greenhouse. The spotted wing just moves out for those hot months, so.
All right, and unfortunately, I don't know if Sonia Schloman, who is my colleague in UMass, or just retired. Good for you, Sonia. I'm gonna miss you this year, but anyway, she said that she has seen them in greenhouses and high tunnels, and we certainly have a lot of problems with SWD in high tunnels and greenhouses. I do think there is something to the fact that heat kind of affects how the fecundity, basically the ability to breed with SWD. So when it gets real hot, we might see a slowing in that, but I wouldn't bank on it completely.
Right.
Yeah.
I would definitely not either. I have there's 3 very large fig trees that live in the end of my greenhouse that is heated. So I get enormous production on them every year. A good Brava crop and then a good main crop because they have time to ripen because I'm heating it. And like they're already starting to wake up now, even though it's going to be 9 degrees in the next couple nights. But essentially they were here at the farm when I bought the place. So I inherited these fig trees from some, 3rd generation Italian immigrants who had planted them a very long time ago. And in the past couple of years, the clouds of SWD in there have just gotten like completely insane. So I go in and pick every morning and every evening during the period where the main crop is coming in. And I mean, to put it in perspective, I think I dried down and ended up freezing about 10 gallons of figs this year. That's dried. So that's, probably 1/10 of the total volume. So I probably, it was quite a lot of fruit. But when they start to go crazy, I start to lose, they go from unripe and unpalatable to a vinegar ball, I mean, within 12 hours. So, because they're so soft, the SWD has just no problem with them at all. So, and that end of the greenhouse gets ragingly hot. So I've tried everything, and that's going to definitely be a major challenge for growing them inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just how that fruit goes from not ripe to ripe in such a short time is also that's one of the challenges with a lot of these different plants is going to a commercial level. It's just very, very hard to manage. And most everyone I think on this call are kind of looking for that little niche market or kind of trying to add something to their overall farm profile of products. So there's a place for a lot of these things, but boy, starting small is really important because managing this stuff is tough.
I sometimes get really annoyed by those qualities, but I also try to remind myself that is the only reason that these things haven't been majorly industrialized. So we kind of have to deal with the inconveniences because if they were really convenient to grow, they'd be commodities by now. It's kind of like how I feel about the Sun Gold cherry tomato, right? It cracks easily.
Yeah,
and
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd have fresh figs from Turkey everywhere.
Exactly.
So this is a
Right.
yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to look. It seems like the chat is kind of slowed. We're probably got a bunch of hungry people, and that is completely. I've tried to answer things as we went. There's thank you very much, Ian, for putting an indoor production video on there if people are interested in that. And there was just a lot of chat about how so it seems like a lot of people have some experience growing figs and they're trying to share that with each other. So that's great. Okay. Yes, I can definitely leave the chat open. I won't turn off the meeting room for a little bit. How's that? And so people can kind of discuss with each other. Actually, I have had an inquiry from a number of different people about how this group could potentially keep communicating with one another. And I guess I'm wondering if it would be acceptable to those of you that registered. And I got to make sure I've got everybody that say yes. I guess if you would like to share your email address, your name and your email address with other people on this group, if you could chat your name into the chat box, then I can take that record of the chat and save it for those people. I want to respect some people that just don't want any more email or don't want to be, but I could share that with the group, and that way you could, you would know where some of your other enthusiasts are. So just make sure that you put your name in the email. Don't just say yes, but yes. Thank you, Andrew. Exactly like that. That'll help me. If you put your name and your email there, that's perfect. Perfect, Matthew. Great. Okay, so I'm going to say thank you very much to Roger for that great presentation. You covered a lot of ground. And for the rest of you, I'm going to leave this on for another 10 minutes or so, 9 minutes, and then we'll turn it off right at 1 o'clock.